Jacob opened his eyes to a sky that made no sense. Instead of blue, it was full of swirling purple clouds that shimmered like oil. Orange light lit the horizon, but there was no sun, just a pulsing glow. He sat up quickly, heart pounding, trying to breathe, but the air felt heavy, like it was thicker than it should be. Beneath him, the ground wasn't dirt or grass. It was smooth, like glass, and it pulsed faintly with a soft light, almost like it was alive, confused and sore. Jacob struggled to remember how he got there, but his memory was a blank wall. No ship, no crash, no dream, nothing. Just the sound of a low hum beneath the surface. He looked around, then froze. Lying a few feet away was something. A woman, but not like any he had seen. Her skin was silver, not pale or dark, but shining, smooth, and perfect. Her long white hair shimmered like moonlight, and her eyes were open, glowing with a soft teal light. She was staring straight at him, calm and quiet, as if she had been waiting for him to wake up. Jacob backed away slightly, unsure, but she didn't move to attack. Instead, she sat up slowly, graceful and calm, and spoke in perfect English. Her voice soft but clear. She said, "You called me." He blinked, confused. "What?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I don't even know you." She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "You opened the gate. I heard your voice. So I came." Jacob shook his head. "No, I didn't call anyone. I don't even know. Where I am?" She stood now, tall and elegant, and looked toward the horizon. "This world is between places. Few ever reach it, fewer survive the landing. But you made it, and your signal woke many." Jacob looked around again, trying to understand, but there was no time. The sky, already strange, began to shift. Clouds turned dark. Then something tore through the sky. Massive black ship, sharp-edged and growling as it descended. Behind it, others followed, like a swarm of knives. The air changed. It screamed. Drop pods began falling from the sky, slamming into the ground with thunderous force. The ground shook, cracks splitting the glassy surface. From each pod came creatures, alien things shaped like crabs and spiders, armored in black with glowing red eyes and long limbs tipped in blades. They screeched as they spread out, weapons in hand, scanning for something. For him, Jacob could barely move. He was frozen with fear, holding a broken piece of metal he had grabbed without thinking. But Alir, the alien woman, was already in front of him. She raised one hand, and a burst of golden light erupted in a circle around them. The alien guns fired, but their shots struck an invisible wall and scattered like sparks. "They heard your call too," she said calmly, even as the shield flickered. Jacob stared at her in disbelief. "Who are they?" "The Creel," she said, watching the advancing creatures with cold eyes. "They devour, they destroy, and now they want you." "Why me?" he cried out, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. "Because you opened something that should have stayed closed," she said. Then she grabbed his hand. Her grip was warm and strong, and without another word, she pulled him to his feet and ran. Behind them, the Creel howled. Their limbs struck the ground in bursts of speed, chasing them across the glowing plains. Blades sang through the air. But Alira was fast, leading him through twisting paths of light, leaping over crystal ridges, guiding him with purpose. Jacob didn't understand any of it where he was, what she meant by a gate, or why monsters were hunting him. But one thing was clear, he wasn't alone. And the strange woman who had waited beside him when he woke up was the only reason he was still alive. The glass plain stretched endlessly ahead, but the way she ran made him believe there was shelter somewhere, maybe even answers. Behind them, the sky screamed again. The hunt had only begun. ChatGPT said. They ran across the glowing plains. Breath sharpened their chests, with the ground trembling under the weight of the Creel swarm behind them. Illyra's grip on Jacob's hand was firm, guiding him through winding paths like she knew exactly where to go. The strange landscape shifted with each step, Crystal pillars rose and fell, and strange lights pulsed in the distance. Jacob couldn't think, couldn't speak, could only follow her as the alien sounds behind them grew louder, sharper, closer. Then she pulled him toward a tall structure ahead, rising like a broken spine from the earth. It was half collapsed, covered in dust and vines of glowing threads. The entrance was narrow, hidden between two fallen slabs. They ducked inside, and the sounds of the outside world faded a little. Inside, it was dark, quiet, and filled with strange machines that looked older than time. Pipes hung from the ceiling, screens flickered. Symbols pulsed softly on the walls. Jacob dropped to the ground, breathing hard, his heart pounding in his ears. Illyra stood still, watching the doorway, her glowing eyes alert. After a long moment of silence, she finally turned toward him and spoke, her voice low but steady. She explained that the creatures chasing them were called the Creel, destroyers of worlds, and they had come to this planet for him. Jacob, still catching his breath, shook his head and said he didn't understand. He didn't call anyone. He didn't know where he was or how any of this had happened. But Illyra looked at him with calm eyes and said it wasn't his voice that called her. It was something deeper, something old, something human. She said his blood had opened a signal, a ripple in space that had reached her people and her kind, had listened. Jacob didn't know what to say. Nothing made sense. But when he leaned against the wall to steady himself, something strange happened. The surface beneath his hand lit up with a warm glow. Symbols appeared, spinning and rearranging themselves. Machines that had been silent for ages started humming again. Hey! The air shifted. Illyra stepped closer, watching with quiet amazement, then nodded slowly. She told him that the planet was responding to him. Not to her, not to any other species, just him. It recognized him. Jacob stared down at his hand, glowing faintly with that same warm light. He whispered that he was nobody, that there must be some mistake, but Illyra only said that the world didn't make mistakes, it remembered, and now so must he. As they spoke, the Creel outside began to gather. Their swarm was massive, surrounding the spire. Shadows passed over the cracks in the wall. The hum of scanners filled the air. Illyra turned her head sharply and said they had to move again soon. The Creel would tear through the walls before long. Jacob asked why they were chasing him, why he mattered to them, and she answered that the Creel feared the Warden, a being, or a machine she didn't fully know that slept beneath the surface of this world. The Creel had tried to destroy it long ago and failed. Now they believed a human could wake it. That human was Jacob. He laughed once, short and bitter, and said he wasn't a hero. He's just a regular man who fixed satellites and flew test missions. But Illyra reminded him that it wasn't about being a hero. It was about being the one who was. Left. The last signal from Earth, long ago, had vanished, and yet he remained. The machines believed in him. But the Creel feared him. Something inside him had reached across space and pulled both friend and enemy to this place. The building, a Creel beast, slammed into the wall, cracking it. Dust fell. Jacob looked at her, eyes wide with fear, but she held his gaze and said that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. He had called out. Now the universe had answered, and ready or not, he had to face it. The sound of alien voices grew, louder, clicking and hissing. The walls trembled again. Illyra drew a blade of light from her palm, her face hardening. She looked at Jacob, nodded once, and said they would fight their way through if they had to. And he, holding a metal rod shaking hands, nodded back. He didn't know what waited ahead, but he knew he couldn't run forever. They escaped just before the wall gave in, running through tight tunnels under the surface that Illyra seemed to know by heart. The deeper they went, the more the air felt alive, almost like it watched them. Strange vines glowed faint blue along. The walls and soft hums echoed through the passages like whispers. After a long descent, they entered a wide chamber that took Jacob's breath away. It wasn't made of stone or metal, but something older, something smooth and glowing with lines of golden light. And in the center stood a machine, large and round, resting silently like a giant heart. It pulsed faintly, waiting. Jacob walked forward slowly, as if in a dream. The machine didn't look like anything he had seen on Earth, yet it felt familiar. There was a faded symbol on the front, partly buried in dust. He wiped it clean and froze. It was the old NASA logo, cracked and glowing faintly. Stepped back, heart racing. "What is this?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. Lyra stepped beside him, her expression calm but full of meaning. She explained that long ago, when Earth's old empires explored the stars, they left behind machines. Like this, sleeping guardians built to protect planets, to wait for the day a human would return. Most were lost or destroyed. This one had survived, buried and forgotten, until Jacob's presence awakened it. She said her people, the Rithari, believed these machines were only myths. But the Creel believed otherwise. That's why they had followed his signal. They feared what might awaken. Jacob stood in silence, staring at the machine. He couldn't believe it. Earth had made this. How long ago? Before the world changed. Before the silence. He touched the console again, and the machine stirred. Light bloomed across its surface. A voice came alive, old, deep, broken with static, but clearly human. Authorization confirmed. Earthlink core, active. The room responded, at the ground. Shifted. Hidden walls opened. Above them, deep within the planet, old weapons came online. Drones, turrets, sky towers. Jacob backed away, watching it all happen, stunned, as the machine had listened to him. Alira stepped forward and smiled for the first time. "You just made it a fair fight," she said softly. Outside, the Creel ships were spreading across the skies, setting up siege lines and calling in reinforcements. But now the planet was awake. Metallic towers rose from the ground, humming with power. Swarms of defense drones zipped through the sky. Cannons locked onto Creel ships and opened fire, slicing the sky with beams of energy. The Creel screamed and scattered, not expecting resistance, and not from this world. Jacob could feel something inside him shift. A weight lifted. He wasn't helpless anymore. He had been chosen, maybe by mistake, maybe by fate, but he had power now. Illyra handed him a small glowing cube. You can link with the core. You can guide its machines with thought. It listens only to your kind. Jacob hesitated, then closed his fingers around the cube. Energy flowed through him. His thoughts stretched. He could feel the battlefield, see the drones, the towers, the moving enemy lines. He knew where to strike. Without fully understanding how, he gave the command. The drones moved in perfect sync, targeting the Creel with precise fury. More towers rose from beneath the surface. Earth's old weapons, built long ago, fought once more not for Earth, but for its last voice. Jacob climbed into an ancient exomech suit that opened from the floor. The machine molded to him, powered by Earthlink energy, fit as if it had waited just for him. Illyra fought beside him, casting shields of light and launching energy blasts that burned through Creel beasts. They pushed forward together, fighting like a two-person army. The Creel forces, once confident, now scrambled to adapt. For the first time, they bled. And Jacob, once lost and afraid, became a force they hadn't planned for. He wasn't just a survivor now. He was a signal, a spark, a threat. The machines of Earth had not forgotten their purpose. Jacob Hayes had become the one they answered to. The battle above raged like a storm, but deep under the planet's crust. Jacob and Illyra kept moving forward, following the path revealed by the Earthlink core. The machines had drawn back the floor, uncovering a long bridge of glowing metal that stretched over a sea of pure energy. As they crossed, strange memories flickered in Jacob's mind, images of old Earth cities, space stations, and faces he didn't know, but somehow felt. Illyra noticed the change in him and explained that the core was sharing echoes of the past, showing him the legacy he had stepped into. At the other end of the bridge stood a large gate, black, curved, and covered in old Earth tech, merged with alien stone. It pulsed like a heartbeat. This was what the Creel had feared, the final seal. Illyra warned him that once the gate opened, there was no turning back. What lay beyond was the Warden, the ancient weapon left by Earth's founders, sleeping for centuries. Jacob stepped forward, his heart pounding, but the gate didn't open to his hand. Instead, it responded to his blood. A needle rose from the panel and pricked his skin. The gate read his DNA and accepted him as the last human key. It opened with a loud, deep sound, the walls folding in like petals. Heat rushed out. Inside, they found a giant chamber where a massive machine part being stood in stillness, arms crossed, eyes shut. It looked human in shape, but larger than a tank, covered in ancient symbols and glowing blue circuits. Around it floated shards of memory, pieces of history frozen in time. Jacob stepped closer, drawn to it. As he touched the core at its base, the warden's eyes opened to beams of white light shining through the dark. A voice echoed in the chamber, deep and old, asking for command. Jacob didn't speak, simply nodded. The warden bowed its head and powered up, shaking the walls with its awakening. Outside, the Creel forces started falling back. They had sensed it. Their scanners showed energy levels rising fast. Panic spread in their ranks. The larger motherships began forming a blockade in the sky, firing down toward the core. But now Earth's last guardian had risen, and it responded to Jacob. The warden's systems linked with him directly. He could feel its strength, its history, its purpose. This was no simple war machine. It was a promise that Earth would never be forgotten. He stepped into the pilot chamber inside the warden's chest, where the controls adjusted to his touch, and the machine rose into the air. Breaking through layers of earth and stone in a burst of blue fire, Lyra flew beside him, carried by wings of light summoned from her armor. Together they surged upward. The Creel met them with rage. Ships opened fire. Beasts leaped from cliffsides. But the warden answered with ancient weapons, sending out waves of energy that shattered shields and melted steel. Jacob guided its strikes with thought alone, crushing enemy machines with massive fists or tearing ships apart with light spears. The battlefield turned chaotic. Towers rose from the earth, joining the warden. The sky darkened from smoke and fire. But Jacob kept going, pushing forward toward the center of the Creel swarm. He wasn't just fighting for his life now. He was protecting something older, something sacred. The memory of Earth, the last signal of his people, burned inside him like a star. When the Creel mothership aimed its doomsday beam at the planets, Core Jacob made the choice. He launched the warden into the sky, crashing through layers of enemy armor, taking the blast head-on. The explosion lit up the sky. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from the fire, the warden stepped out, burned and battered but standing. The Creel screamed in terror. Their leader, a massive beast of claws and smoke, came down from the mothership to stop him. The final duel began, man against monster, memory against oblivion. Jacob, inside the warden, fought with everything he had, blow for blow, shield for shield, scream for scream. It wasn't skill that kept him alive. It was will. It's a will to protect. The will to finish what Earth had started. When the warden's final blade pierced the Creel leader's core, the battlefield went still. One by one, the Creel stopped fighting and fled, their swarm broken. The sky cleared. The towers powered down. The hum of Earthlink faded to a low whisper. And Jacob, bleeding and breathless inside the machine, looked out over the world he had saved, a forgotten place that had waited so long for someone to return. Elira flew to his side and reached for his hand. He took it, not as a warrior, but as a man who had finally remembered who he was. The battlefield lay silent, scattered with the wreckage of broken ships and shattered armor, smoke curling toward the strange sky that had once burned with war. Jacob climbed out of the warden, every muscle aching, his hands trembling as the last echoes of the battle faded. Elira stood beside him, her silver skin streaked with dirt and blood, her glowing eyes softer now. She said the Creel had truly fled, their fear too deep to return, but she warned him that others across the stars had also felt the warden's awakening. News would spread. A human had returned and worse, had won. As Jacob looked across the ruined land, he felt the weight of what he had done and what it meant. He was no longer just a lost man from a forgotten planet. He'd become the voice of Earth, its final messenger. But even with victory, questions still burned inside him. Why had the Earthlink chosen him? What had really happened to Earth? And what was he supposed to do now? Elira led him back down through the spire, past quiet machines and sleeping walls, until they reached a hidden chamber Jacob hadn't seen before. It was round, filled with light. And in its center floated a sphere made of crystal and fire and ancient memory core, untouched for centuries. Elira said it was one of the last beacons left behind by humanity's long-lost explorers. When Jacob placed his hand on it, the sphere opened. Images flooded the room Earth as it once was, shining blue and alive, then cities burning, stars fading. Old ships leaving orbit as the planet fell silent. He saw the last of the explorers' scientists. Soldiers, builders scatter across the stars, each carrying a shard of Earth with them, hoping to survive. The Earthlink core he had awakened was one of their final gifts. A guardian meant to wait and protect, tied to human blood and memory. Jacob watched in silence as the story unfolded. He saw that Earth didn't die in war, it fell to time too. Silence, to being forgotten. Other species rose. Some feared humans, others erased them. And yet, through all that time, the signal had waited, buried deep in this world, listening. And somehow, through fate or accident, Jacob had answered it. He stepped back from the sphere, stunned. He was a survivor, not just of battle, but of history. A flame from a world that had gone dark. Lyra watched him carefully and said that now the stars would come looking. Some would want peace. Others would want him dead. But he still had a choice. He could run, or he could lead. Jacob thought long and hard. He was no general, no politician, but he had seen the worst, and he had fought it. And he knew now that Earth wasn't just a place. It was an idea, a strength, a promise. He turned to the Earthlink core and activated the beacon again, this time sending out a message. Not a warning, not a threat, just a voice. A human voice saying, "We are still here." Across space, old sensors would wake. Allies might hear it. Enemies too. But it was time. Jacob and Illyra stood side by side as the tower rose again, sending its pulse into the stars. This planet would no longer be silent. Earth's legacy had spoken, and it carried the strength of all who had been lost. The future was uncertain, but Jacob knew this. He wouldn't face it alone. Not anymore. The stars were quiet at first, as if listening, but it didn't last long. They circled from afar, scanning and watching. Jacob stood at the highest platform of the spire with Illyra, his eyes fixed on the endless space beyond. He didn't feel fear anymore, only the heavy stillness of someone waiting for the next move. Illyra warned him that these were not allies. They were scavengers, empires, and collector species that had grown strong during humanity's silence. To them, Earth's machines and the Warden were treasures from a forgotten time, powerful and dangerous. They would not ask for peace. They would demand surrender. When no surrender came, they would attack. Jacob didn't flinch. Together, they activated shields, rebuilt towers, and prepared for a siege. The Earthlink core grew brighter each day, pulsing like a heart as it repaired itself and synced more deeply with Jacob's mind. He no longer struggled to control it. He guided it like instinct, as if the machines now breathed with him. One morning, without warning, the first fleet opened fire. Blue beams fell from the sky, crashing into the ground, scorching fields and lighting forests on fire. But this time, the planet struck back fast. Drones swarmed upward. Cannons lit the sky. The Warden stood tall at the center, its eyes blazing like suns. Jacob moved within it, calm and focused. The enemy ships were fast, but they didn't know Earth's technology. They didn't expect it to fight so hard. Still, the attack was only the beginning. More ships came, bigger fleets from across the galaxy, trying to claim the world Jacob now protected. The skies turned into a storm of battle, and every day became a war for survival.
Ow.
But Jacob didn't fight alone. Illyra stood beside him always. her people slowly arriving from hidden places in space, drawn by the old bond her race once had with Earth's explorers. One by one, they pledged their help not because of the machines, but because of Jacob himself. They saw how he stood, how he never gave up, how he protected a world not even his own. He had become something more than a survivor. He had become a symbol. As the battles raged, messages began to spread between the stars. Rumors told of a human who woke a sleeping world, a man who stood inside a god machine and defied fleets, a human who spoke with Earth's voice. Some were barely more than dust, but they listened. Some started sending answers. They were scattered, forgotten people, but still alive. They had waited for a sign, and now they had one. Jacob's message had lit a fire in the dark. Near the end of the 6th week, a massive enemy fleet arrived, an ancient empire known as the Drenari, made of machines and metal mines, conquerors of hundreds of planets. They sent no warning, no message, just a signal. We will take what remains. Jacob stood before the Earthlink core one last time and asked it for help, not just weapons, but a voice. The core answered. It showed him something hidden deep within the planet. A second warden, larger, sealed in a vault beneath the surface. Half finished but powerful. Together with Alira, Jacob reactivated it. The twin warden rose from the ground like a titan reborn. And in the sky, the final battle began. The Drenari came with machines the size of cities, firing beams that shattered mountains. But Jacob, inside the warden, and Alira in the second one, fought together like fire and thunder. The battle lasted for hours. The skies burned. The ground cracked, and when the dust finally settled, only one flag remained. Jacob's. The enemy was broken. The planet stood free. And the stars, for the first time in ages, were quiet again. Jacob stepped from the warden, exhausted, barely able to stand, but he smiled as Alira helped him. Round them survivors cheered. A new world had been defended. A new future had been born. And Jacob Hayes, the man who woke alone next to an alien woman on a strange planet, had become the spark that brought Earth's memory roaring back to life. After the final battle, the world was quiet, but it was not empty. Fires no longer burned in the sky, and the broken ships that once rained destruction now drifted like silent ghosts above the clouds. The land began to heal, and from the cracked soil, new growth pushed its way into the light. Jacob stood at the edge of a tall ridge, watching the horizon where the sun spilled golden fire across the hills. He didn't wear armor now. He didn't need to. The war was over, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he breathed without fear. Behind him, Alira approached, her step soft, her presence calm. She no longer carried a weapon, and her silver eyes no longer glowed with battle. She looked human in that moment, worn but peaceful. She told Jacob that more Rythari had arrived in secret, guided by the beacon he had sent, and they were ready to help him build. Not just walls or weapons, but homes, schools, gardens, life. Jacob turned back to the horizon and asked her what kind of world this was now. She didn't answer with words, only reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was a world that waited for someone to lead, not with power, but with purpose. And Jacob, despite all his doubts, knew he couldn't walk away. Over the next few weeks, they gathered people from across the broken regions, survivors, travelers, even wounded enemy soldiers, who no longer had a cause to follow. Jacob didn't judge them, welcomed all who wanted peace. They built shelters. From the ruins of fallen towers, they used old Earth tech to restore water, light, and food. The Earthlink core, no longer focused on battle, helped them terraform patches of dry ground, making the world livable again. Slowly, a city began to rise, not one of steel and power, but of quiet beauty. It had no name yet. People simply called it the Return. Jacob spent his days walking its paths, helping carry stones, planting seeds, speaking with those who had stories to share. They looked to him not as a hero anymore, but as something more important, a builder. And Jacob found peace in that. Yet even as life bloomed, messages from the stars kept arriving. Small ships came down now and then, bringing more humans, descendants of lost colonies who had heard the voice of Earth and followed it. Some came crying, others silent, but all carried the same truth: they had thought they were alone. Oh, they knew they weren't. Jacob welcomed them all, giving each a place in the growing world. One night, as the stars burned cold and clear, Jacob and Alira stood on the edge of the new city, looking up. She asked if he missed Earth. He nodded, but not with sadness. Said Earth wasn't just a place, it was the people, the ideas, the memories they carried. And here now, in this strange world with old machines and new life, Earth was alive again. Not the same, but not forgotten. Lyra smiled gently and asked him what came next. Jacob thought for a moment, then said that if they could build this from nothing, then maybe they could do more. Maybe they could reach the others still lost in space. Maybe they could bring back more than memories. A council was formed in the weeks after, a mix of species, human and alien, all equal. Together, they wrote the first new laws of this world. Not for control, but for understanding, for peace. And Jacob, though offered the highest seat, refused it. He said his job was done. He would remain a guide, a builder, nothing more. People cheered his name, but he always smiled and reminded them he had only followed the signal. The real power had come from those who chose to believe again. As months passed, the world grew brighter. Children ran through green fields. New ships flew the skies. Not for war, but for trade, for exploration. The warden now stood in silence. At the city's edge, not a weapon, but a monument, covered in carvings that told the story of how one man woke, found a stranger, and changed the stars. Jacob sometimes sat beneath it, hands in the dirt, helping young ones plant trees. When they asked him who he really was, he always gave the same answer: I'm just someone who listened. And far above, in the endless dark, the stars finally began to whisper back,